Hi,
Thank
Toby.
you. Hi, Lee. Thank you, Philip. It's so nice to come onto your forum. I've been a big admirer of your work for a long, long time, but I particularly felt connected to what you were doing because I was locked down on Waiheke Island, and there was a lot of turbulence around that time. And when I saw the World Hope Forum pop up, it really resonated with me. And I particularly this conversation around healing with craft, the trauma. It's really important. And I think it's really valuable. So thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we're happy to have you because from the beginning, your itinerary has sounded so amazing, especially what you initiated also during COVID.
Yeah, and I think that maybe the thing that's interesting, I suppose, is because I used to identify myself as a fashion designer, and I don't anymore. And as I go through my slides, you'll see that story. But I think, the thing that fashion designers have is their sensory intuition, and I think that that comes through in all of the work of designers, is that ability to be sensory, and that obviously is picking up on some sort of intuition. And I look forward to showing you my work actually, because maybe then you can see.
Please.
Okay, I will start the screen. Okay, so can you see that clearly? Okay, so I'm starting it as a framework for metaphors for life. It came out of a conversation with Philip actually, but I thought it was a very nice way of framing this conversation. And my starting point is when I think about healing trauma through craft, I sort of think about what craft is. And I think it's a crafted love. And when I think about what that means in words, I think about desire and about consistency. And I think about quality and I think about dedication. And I also really think about comfort. And just to give you some context, where I started out, I actually came from a little village in North Wales where fashion designers were a rarity and it was a bit novel. But I created my own label, Toby Clark, and I sold that around the world to various stores like Barney's New York and Shinsegae in Korea and Brown's of South Molton Street. But eventually, after maybe 10 years, I found my home at Margaret Howell, and I was the head designer there for about 12 years. And, I'd still say that Margaret is my favorite designer on earth. She's amazing. I love the way she approaches design. I love the fact that she focuses on cloth and she focuses on the idea of texture and she focuses on the idea of longevity of garment and of the make and the quality and all those really important things. And I think our values really align closely. And as you can see from the images, these were taken by Venetia Scott, and these were the last campaign images that I was involved with. But there's definitely a connection with nature there, which is very important to the brand. But something I did start feeling myself, and this was personal to me, was I started feeling about 10, 15 years ago that my own footprint had maybe a responsibility to the number of garments that I was responsible for bringing on into the environment. And I think that perhaps was maybe one of the reasons why I ended up stepping away from Margaret, just because I started to think, maybe I should really try and focus on the environment a little bit more. So the next project I did was around ecological denim, and that was looking at a product that has a universal reference point. Everybody wears denim, everyone wears jeans. And this project was about locality and connecting makers to wearers, about connecting textiles to the soil, and about longevity. It was Black Horse Lane Ateliers, which was an old factory in Walthamstow in East London. And we did things a little bit differently. We had what we describe as a factory catwalk. So customers could actually come in and walk the catwalk alongside the makers and observe the jeans being made. So it was very much about making that connection between actually when you walk into a shop and you don't really have any idea not only who's made your clothes, but actually how the garments are made. This was a direct response to that, where consumers could see these things being made and actually understand the process before trying them on at the end of the catwalk. So that was a kind of different approach. We also had a restaurant inside, so people could come in and dine in the factory, which also gave them a very different atmosphere. And we also had our own indigo allotment. So we were growing Japanese indigo plants because we really wanted to connect textiles to the earth. And it was a lovely project to do, and it's still very successful. And I think it's the only salvage denim maker in London. And lots of brands are now connecting with us with Black Horse Lane. And then for me, I was feeling a real conscious awakening. Had this sense of intuition about the responsibility and about the care for our planet. And I actually went up onto Primrose Hill, which is this amazing viewing platform in London. And as I looked out, I noticed this inscription on the curved York stone there, which says, "I have conversed with the spiritual sun. I saw him on Primrose Hill." And that's by William Blake, the poet and the artist of around 250 years ago. But what particularly resonated with me was that William Blake, being a man, called the sun masculine, him. And I was thinking about Mother Earth being feminine. And I was thinking about all these greenhouse gases. And I was thinking about the masculine sun heating up the feminine earth. And just in response to that, I knelt down and I made the sun with these little pebbles. And the reason those pebbles were there were due to subsidence and degradation of the soil due to all the people coming up onto the hill. And I had this little book by Babette Buster, which was Do Listen, and which is a lovely little book. And I'd put that down and I'd put my little keep cup down. And at that moment, this amazing thing happened where this young magpie arrived, who I call the listening magpie. And this little magpie was for me about intuition, about observation, about spirituality, and also about gentle curiosity. Because, I mean, I've never seen a magpie behave the way this one did. She came over and she was quite young and she tilted her head and just rested it on my keep cup. And then she started pulling at my book. Then she picked up a pebble in her mouth. And then she just sat there, turned around and started observing the view with me. And it was really quite amazing. And a lady behind me came over and was almost shrieking, saying, "Oh my God, is that your pet bird?" And it was actually quite funny in that way. But it was a really beautiful moment. And it was really inspirational for me because what I was thinking at that time, I felt like the magpie was completely resonating with what I was thinking, which was really quite interesting. Um, so by default, I kind of became the self-appointed artist in residence on Primrose Hill. This is quite a funny, empowering thing, the idea that anybody can be self-appointed, really. It was a name given to me by a lady who was at the Slade School of Fine Art. And she just said, "Toby, you are the artist in residence here now." So I kind of took that on. And this was about mindful healing and gentle activism and about breath and flow, about with using local materials at my feet. And it was particularly about value without commerce. So I was making these creations really for two reasons. One, for the magpie to make something attractive to her, but also I was collecting human debris, which things people just threw on the floor on the hill. There were human waste products, and I was mixing them with fallen nature. So it kind of gave an interesting context, I suppose, to what was going on. And each day I didn't know what I was making. It was really what I was finding at my feet. So every day they were different. And they kind of affected the seasons, with different colors and different elements of texture and form. And people were coming and photographing them. And it was just a lovely thing that was connecting the community. Quite often they were inspired by the sun and geometric shapes. And this is when people started getting in touch with me saying, "Well, I love your mandalas." And to be honest, I didn't really know what a mandala was. So I then started researching that to sort of get my own understanding of Buddhist monks and that sort of idea. And then this leads on to the Great Slowdown. It leads on to the period of COVID, which was particularly about uncertainty, about loss. It was a time to pause, about reflection, and it was also very much about hope. And for me, I actually found myself locked down on Waiheke Island. It's a very long story. I don't have time to explain it today, but this is where, when I think about the subject today, it particularly resonates with me because this was very much about isolation and it was about emotional turbulence. It was about separation, and it was also about healing through creativity. Um, and one of the things I did, which was a sort of personal manifesto, was I started wearing the same clothes every day. And that was I think for me, it was a radical response to what was happening with COVID, and but also in terms of how I was feeling about clothing and about the industry that I'd been working in for so many years. So it was resisting newness, it was about attachment, it was about identity, and it was very much about love. The outfit that I'm going to show you, the interesting thing about it was I didn't have any preconceived notion as to what I was going to do this one outfit with. I literally decided with whatever outfit I happened to be wearing that day. So I made the conscious decision after having already got dressed. And I just thought to myself, well, wow, if I stopped eating, I would die, but I won't die if I don't change my clothes, And I thought that was a really interesting thought process, that if I do this for the rest of my life, in a way, I know what clothes I'll be when I eventually pass, which was also interesting. So every single day I photographed the garments because I was particularly interested in how they were changing state. I was interested in the fault lines of garments, being a designer, seeing where they were wearing down and breaking down. But it was also an artistic thing for me where each day I made a different shape with the garments and different concepts. So there's many different iterations, but I think, the thing that's interesting is it really created an identity where if you do something all of the time, it actually strengthens your identity. And if we change clothes every single day, in a way, we're losing that identity. We're not gaining from that second skin. So that was quite interesting. The blankets there, because if you can imagine, I only had one set of clothes. I was very purist. So whenever I washed my clothes, I had the blanket to wrap around myself. Here's some more playful ideas around this. And then I was washing all the garments in rainwater. Waiheke is a very eco place. So I was then photographing them again in their wash damp state. And then I was drying them in the sun. And this is an iteration of all of the garments just lying in the sun, just drying. So I was totally using nature's power, really. I mean, that's the thing that really fascinated me as well. And then during the day, what I'd learnt on the hill with the mandalas was looking for local material, because I think the whole thing for me was, having worked in an industry of global supply chains, I was particularly interested in just using things that are there, that have found their way there through nature. So this was about local materials at my feet. It was about transience and impermanence. It was about mindful healing, and it was also about nature's rhythm. Because if you imagine, the tides, they're governed by the moon and the sun. So I was making these creations when the tides went out. And the thing I particularly loved about it was like a clean piece of paper for me. When you think about Ray Kawakubo always cleaning her desk every night, the sea came and washed these away. So they were only there for fleeting moments. But they were a very different scale to what I'd done on the hill. These things were really quite large. So it also kind of embedded a community where people were coming and photographing them. And again, there were many iterations. I had no idea when I started them what I was making. The only thing I started with was a circle with my feet, and the circle was very much about circularity. It was about the earth. It was about the sun. It was about the moon. And from that base, I would then build the mandalas around it. You can see one there where the tide's beginning to take it. And that moment, I always loved just seeing them washed away, because I kind of knew that they were done, and yet they were special for that moment. Here I actually made one for Lee, which was which was quite sweet. And then the money was really interesting, because the whole thing for me was, this was about creating value for the community with no commercial value, and yet someone donated money to me, which was sort of amusing because it made me feel a little bit like an impoverished artist. But it also gave me some anxiety. And the lady was quite elderly, and she had a little dog, and went running over to her and said, no, 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 sorry, I can't take this money. It's so sweet of you. So I actually gave the money to her dog sanctuary, which was quite a nice thing to do. And then these are the kids that I absolutely loved. So I guess they'd been a little bit inspired by what I was doing. And then I'd wake up some mornings and I'd find iterations that they had made, and like that best friends forever. They become surprises to me. And I did some little workshops with the children. I did some birthday parties for them, and that really embedded me into the community. And it was really beautiful. And it just felt like I'd inspired them, but then they were inspiring me back. Um, these were some ideas I did with shells that I found around the island, and the ones with the shells I really like to put in secret alcoves so people could discover them, because again that kind of gave it that sense of, you're not quite sure whether it's part of nature or not. I think that was the bit that was I found quite interesting. And then tidal spinning was when the tides were out, sorry, when the tides were in and I wasn't able to make the mandalas, I was indoors in my batch and I was spinning wool. And so this was about tactility and about childhood memories, about a cathartic rhythm. And actually the reason I became a fashion designer was because of my mother. She came from a sheep station in New Zealand and she used to spin wool when I was a very little boy. And I used to watch this happening and I was fascinated by the transformative process of wool when it goes from a bale, like a cloud-like bale, into the fine yarn. And then eventually it goes into a hank and then people knit with it. So I really wanted to learn that. I'd become the ambassador for the Campaign for Wool New Zealand. So this was a really nice way for me to understand the properties of wool, because even though I'd been a designer for so long, sometimes actually getting back to the raw product is a really nice thing to do. So I was making all these two-ply hand knit wool yarn balls here. And then I was setting the wool, I was washing the wool, I was looking out at the sea, and it was, I think the thing for me is it felt like where I was observing the rhythm of the tide, the spinning wheel was also affecting that rhythm. There was a kind of symbiotic relationship between the two. Um, and then this was a kind of a little charm that happened. I've always loved writing poetry, but I've never really thought I was very good at it. And this lady, Sonia Yelich O'Connor, who I didn't know who she was, came into my Instagram and said, Toby, I love your eye. Um, and then I discovered that Sonia is an amazing published poet. And she started we became friends, I guess, during COVID. That was the other interesting thing of COVID was these surprise friendships. And through encouragement and craft and discipline, and just a sheer generosity of spirit, she got me writing poetry. But the thing that was particularly surprising to me was I'd been listening to Lord's music. I love Lord. I've always loved her music, and I was listening to it on a loop. And I had no idea that Lord's real name was Ella Yelich O'Connor, and I had no realization that Sonia was actually Lord's mother. So that was also a real surprise to me, but it was just really nice. And this was a piece of poetry I wrote called Cling. I wrote this for Kathy Jetnil-Kilgener, who's an amazing Marshallese poet, and she's a climate activist. And she's spoken at the United Nations. And this was very much about the seawater rising, and about these islands slowly drowning. And it really resonated with me. I saw her work at the Royal Academy in London for Oceana and thought it was amazing. So in a way, this was my little homage to Kathy. And then eventually I left New Zealand. It was 3 years. It was a long, long time. So this great solace was about coming home. And for me, it was about stillness. It was about incubation, and it was about therapy with needle and thread. I worked on this Lowry for probably about 3 months, and I just sat on the floor, and that's all I could do. I did it all day, and I just thought about all the things that had happened in New Zealand, all the amazing things, but also the difficult things. So this was incredibly healing for me. I love the colors. I've always loved Lowry's work because it's so much of the people. And I started creating people within the tapestry, within the cross stitch. They were actually friends of mine, so they could recognize themselves within it. I then gave it to Lucy as a birthday present. And then the final section of this slides are about rekindling purpose for me. It's about rebirth and it's about passion and a belief, about making a positive impact, and of course about healing. And I've been thinking about how can I go back into the industry. And for me, I really think that I don't really want to go back in and create any more new materials. So I think of repair as a linear graph line in solution-driven environmental design. And when trying to identify the one thing we can all do that will have the greatest impact on the environment, repair wins every time. And perhaps that's actually a radical notion. So along with four founders, Helen, David, Mark, and myself, we're setting up Heartfelt Repairs. You can see I wrote it there as a concept on the beach in New Zealand on Waiheke. And we're going to be helping to empower people to repair across the British Isles. And there's a huge wave coming now for repair. It's the most important thing we can all do. And I just feel so passionately about it because there are so many wonderful garments that exist on this earth that just need given a second chance. And I think this is, to me, this is, if the word trend, this is the greatest trend that's going to come is repair. Um, And then the last slide I just wanted to say is just celebrating hope, because I think, with all these anxieties we have, sometimes it's really important to celebrate things that are lovely. These are the first Kiwis to be born in the wild in New Zealand's capital city, Wellington, in over 150 years. And that I saw that news this month, and it just really resonated with me. And I just thought, wow, that's so amazing. So even though I understand there's a lot of difficult things, I think sometimes we should also reflect on these lovely moments too. So thank you so much.
Wow, Toby, that's a beautiful voyage through your last decade or so. Very interesting, very moving also.
Thank you.
We are happy that we were sort of part of it, even on distance. And it
Yeah.
was so nice to sort of meet you online. First time I really sort of met somebody really, instead of just, writing anonymously, we really sort of became friends without even know each other. So it's so beautiful. And
Yeah.
I also saw that you were creating a new fragrance, which is related to this, or was that a...
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in discussions with Robertet in France. I really feel that a healing perfume would be a really interesting thing to do for this earth. And I think, there's a whole load of science there about connecting the brain and the way a scent and sense is such a powerful tool to healing in terms of evoking memories. So it's an industry that I'm really interested in. And yeah, I'm really excited about going on that little journey, really.
No, it's really timely also, I think, because people really need that help. So
Yeah,
important that it could be done.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you sometimes go back to your days with one wardrobe just to learn how you did.
Well, actually, I've put the socks on today. I've kept all the pieces, but I thought it'd be nice to wear the socks again. They were from Scotland, these socks. They were hand knitted and they're shrunken down. They're almost tiny little ankle socks now. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm so tempted just to start wearing them all again. I really am. I mean, of course, they look so different now. I've patched them up a lot, and I just think it's such an interesting thing, and I mean, of course, I'm wearing different clothes, but I still find that I'm tending to wear the same things over and over and over again, and I think that's probably an expression for how I feel right now, but also my experience on Waiheke.
And how does it really feel to always dress the same, let's say, in the
It's
long run?
it's
In
it's Yeah,
Yeah.
it's such an interesting conversation. I think, when you look out to the world, you see all the same colors the same. But of course, it really feels like a second skin to yourself. And I wondered if I would become, a little bit bored of it, but I never did. I actually just thought it was lovely, and I kind of felt like those garments were so much part of me that I just wanted to protect them even more. And I think it was, I mean, an identity builder in a way. And one day the postman came to the door. It's a funny story, and I had to change very quickly because I was washing my clothes and I had a blanket on, and I had to emergency put on a yellow t-shirt that I'd was a secondhand t-shirt, and that was really unbelievable because after having gone 300 days with just a certain color, to change a color, it was so impactful. And it was quite dazzling, actually. It took me a little while to realize what was going on.
So that shows that having less wardrobe is really better also to experience what you have.
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. I think, it's like that anything in life that if you identify with a few things that are special to you, their value increases. And the more you have, the less you have an attachment with those things.
Mm,
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
so in fact, the less you have, the more you have.
Yeah, I think so. I really do feel that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I know that there was one of the comments that came up, and we'll send them to you later. They said that your presentation was like being swaddled.
Ah,
So good start to today and a nice connection with Lee's talk.
oh, that's
And
so nice.
um, I also know that there's some academic teachers in the fashion community that are watching today, and they have been big proponents of getting their students to do fashion fasting and not consuming fashion for, I think, 9 months at a time, maybe even longer. And they've had very interesting results, just as Lee and I did when we were living out of a 2-week wardrobe for 5 months. So we understand and empathize with the creativity that you have from a restricted wardrobe. So that was very nice. There was also some people that asked if you would consider teaching, because I think they'd like to show this to their students. So we can connect you with them. And if ever that's something you'd like to do or collaborate with anybody else in the audience, of course, they're free to reach out to you or to us.
Yeah, of course, I'd love to. That's so nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toby.
So much. So good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas. Bye.
So we're now